Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are focusing on what is, without a doubt, the most high-stakes diplomatic mission Canada has undertaken in, well, nearly a decade. I'm talking about Prime Minister Mark Carney's trip to Beijing. It's a 4-day visit, January 13th to the 17th.
And it's the first time a Canadian Prime Minister has been there in over 8 years.
Exactly. Which just shows you how bad things have gotten. Carney himself is framing this whole thing as a turning point. He's using the word recalibration for the entire relationship.
Right, but you have to understand the context here. This isn't just about making nice. This is driven by a huge economic necessity for Canada right now. It's a strategic move. Canada has been talking for a while about shifting from, quote, reliance to resilience.
And what does that actually mean?
It means doubling non-U.S. exports. And that's almost entirely because of the trade uncertainty coming from the South, especially with President Trump's America First agenda back in the picture.
So we're looking elsewhere for stability.
We have to. Yeah. And China is still Canada's second largest trading partner. We're talking about, what, $118.7 billion in 2024 alone? So for Carney, this is a risk diversification play he has to make.
So it's less about a new golden age and more like securing a lifeboat because our biggest partner is so unpredictable. Okay, to really get what's happening now in Beijing, we need to go back. Because the last decade wasn't just a cooling off period. It was, a diplomatic ice age. So let's unpack that timeline of turbulence.
It's kind of amazing to think that it actually started from a pretty high point. Under former Prime Minister Trudeau, back in 2016, 2017, there was real cooperation.
Within our annual meetings, right?
Annual discussions, new market access for things like Canadian beef. People were genuinely talking about a new golden era of trade.
And that all just evaporated in an instant, December 2018.
The spark was the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei.
In Vancouver. And it wasn't even our decision, really. It was a U.S. extradition request.
Absolutely. Tied to U.S. sanctions against Iran, Canada was caught squarely in the middle.
And Beijing's reaction was swift.
Immediate and severe. They summoned our ambassador, warned of grave consequences, and then just days later, the hammer fell.
The two Michaels.
The arrests of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor on espionage charges. Now, China insisted it was by the book, but for Canadian officials, and really most of the world, it looked like pure retaliation. Hostage diplomacy.
And they didn't just stop at people. They started using economic weapons.
That's right. In the spring of 2019, they just refused huge shipments from Canadian canola producers. The official reason was concerns about pests.
Which nobody really bought.
No. It was seen as clear political punishment. It put incredible stress on farmers in Western Canada right in the middle of this crisis.
And that deep freeze lasted for years.
For almost 3 years. It wasn't until 2021 when Meng Wanzhou reached a deferred prosecution deal in the U.S. and was released.
That the two Michaels were freed just hours later.
Which basically confirmed the political link everyone suspected. But by then, the relationship was just, fundamentally broken.
It kept getting worse.
It did. By 2022, Canada officially banned Huawei from our 5G networks, citing national security. That really solidified a more adversarial stance from Ottawa.
Which all culminated in that incredibly awkward public moment at the G20 summit.
Oh, with President Xi confronting Trudeau on camera.
Berating him for leaking details of a meeting about foreign interference. That was the moment the public veneer just shattered completely.
And that public confrontation really cemented Canada's shift. Later that year, Canada released its Indo-Pacific strategy. And the language in it is critical.
How so?
It officially labeled China an increasingly disruptive global power. The whole idea of seeking a golden age was officially dead and buried.
Okay, so that's the grim backstory. But the immediate fire Carney is trying to put out right now stems from the trade war that kicked off in 2024.
That's right. This is the present crisis.
Yeah.
And you could argue Canada escalated first, really mirroring the U.S.
You're talking about the EV tariffs.
Exactly. In August 2024, Ottawa hit Chinese electric vehicles with a huge 100% tariff. Also a 25% duty on Chinese steel and aluminum. The reason given was unfair subsidies, market dumping, the same arguments the U.S. was making.
And Beijing's response was, let's say, very targeted.
Swift, calculated, and aimed right at Canada's economic weak spot, the agri-food sector.
Starting in March of 2025, what did they do?
They brought in crushing tariffs, a 100% duty on Canadian canola oil, meal, and peas, a 25% tariff on our pork and seafood.
And then they doubled down.
They did. In August, they went after the raw product itself, canola seed, with another tariff of nearly 76%. They basically built a wall around 4 of our key agricultural exports,
The stakes there are just astronomical.
especially for Western Canada. China is by far the biggest buyer of our canola seed. Farm groups like the Canadian Canola Growers Association are saying this is a political problem that needs a political solution.
Because it's clearly leverage against our EV tariffs.
Precisely. And farmers need stability now, before they plant the next crop this spring.
Which brings us to the core negotiation happening in Beijing. Our sources are confirming that Ottawa is in active discussions about maybe lowering or even dropping those EV tariffs.
In exchange for Beijing lifting the agri-food duties.
So if that's the trade-off on the table, is it fair to say that Beijing is kind of dictating the terms here, forcing our hand?
That is the exact question keeping people up at night in Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
It puts Carney in a terrible domestic bind. If he rolls back those EV tariffs,
He faces the anger of the auto sector in central Canada.
and specifically Ontario, Premier Doug Ford has said he is 100% dead against it.
And his argument is what?
It's twofold. First, he warns it would let China dump cheap Chinese parts and cheap vehicles into our market, which could gut the domestic auto industry.
And the second part.
It's maybe even more important. Undermining those tariffs could provoke retaliation from the United States, especially with the CUSMA trade deal renewal negotiations on the horizon.
So we're stuck. We either appease the U.S. or we save our agricultural exports to China. Western farmers versus central Canadian auto workers.
It's an almost impossible balancing act. And that's the backdrop for the early results we've seen from this trip.
Right, the memorandums of understanding, the MOUs.
These are the definition of low-hanging fruit. They signal a thaw, but they aren't binding on the big stuff. They've covered things like clean energy, cultural exchange, tourism, forestry.
On the energy front, it's worth noting China is already a big buyer of our heavy crude.
A growing buyer. And the TMX pipeline expansion makes it much easier to get that oil to the Pacific and over to Asia. It's a key part of getting better prices outside the U.S. market.
And that forestry deal with BC seems pretty significant, too.
It is. It's a 5-year agreement to promote modern wood construction, using Canadian mass timber in China's huge urban renewal projects. It's a clear attempt by BC to find markets beyond the U.S., where they've been hammered by tariffs for years.
So this brings us to the two big competing philosophies on this whole reset.
Exactly. On one side, you have the pragmatists who say these MOUs are necessary. You stabilize the relationship, you secure opportunities in oil and lumber, and you try to solve the agriculture crisis.
And on the other side,
You have the very critical view, which is probably best articulated by the former ambassador, David Mulroney.
and his warning is a stark one.
It's dire. He basically argues Carney is repeating old mistakes. He calls it lazy thinking, choosing the easy path of going back to China instead of doing the really hard work of diversification,
Like what?
like fixing internal regulations, building real supply chains in places like Southeast Asia or Europe. He says that because we're approaching Beijing from a position of weakness.
Driven there by our insecurity with the U.S.
Exactly. And because we failed to impose any meaningful consequences for their foreign interference, he warns Canada risks becoming what he called a vassal state of China.
A vassal state. That's an incredibly heavy accusation, and it connects directly to the moral questions critics say we can't ignore for the sake of trade.
Right, the non-trade issues. China's moves in the Arctic, Parliament recognizing the persecution of the orders as a genocide.
And the execution of 4 Canadian dual citizens for drug crimes in 2025.
All of it. Critics insist the reset has to be conditional on human rights. And for them, the current red line test is the case of Jimmy Lai.
The pro-democracy publisher imprisoned in Hong Kong.
Right. He's not a Canadian citizen, but his mother was, and his family, his sister, nieces, nephews, they're Canadian citizens and residents. For critics, standing up for him isn't just moral, it's a political signal.
A signal that Canada won't trade its values just to sell more canola.
Exactly. They believe if the reset doesn't address these core issues, it's just a temporary economic fix, not a real solution.
And how has the reception been on the ground in China? Does it feel different from, say, when Trudeau visited back in 2016?
Oh, completely different. It's been very restrained. The state-run Xinhua news agency has been cool. No warm welcomes or fanfare. The message seems to be that the responsibility is on Canada to fix things.
So the ball is in our court, in their view.
It seems that way. They keep talking about the need for Canada to resolve each other's concerns and build mutual political trust, which is diplomatic language for give us what we want on trade and politics, and then we can talk. It suggests they know they have the stronger hand.
So after these 4 days of meetings, what's the bottom line? What does this deep dive really tell us?
Well, the visit did succeed in one thing. It restarted high-level dialogue. That's not nothing. And it secured those low-risk deals on energy and forestry. That signals a thaw. But the biggest economic issues are EV tariffs versus their agri-food tariffs. They remain completely tangled together.
Yeah.
And that creates this brutal domestic political problem for Carney, forcing him to decide which major Canadian industry to put at risk.
And it really just highlights Canada's incredibly precarious position in the world right now. We're trying to pivot away from relying on a U.S. that hits us with unpredictable tariffs.
Only to risk becoming more dependent on China, a partner that has proven time and again that it will use economic punishment as a political weapon every few years.
It's like David Mulroney said, it's a kind of geopolitical Groundhog Day.
It really is. And if that's true, if China consistently uses economic punishment as a tool, as we saw with the two Michaels, the canola bans, and now this standoff, it raises a really important question for you to think about. What structural changes beyond just trade deals and these MOUs can Canada actually implement to protect its sovereignty and its economy for the long term? For when the next deep freeze inevitably happens, that's the resilience Canada hasn't figured out yet.